Alright guys, we're quite the Formula 1 news. Just days away from the start of the season in Melbourne, the Ferrari boys give their predictions for the upcoming season. Lewis Hamilton very optimistic about the state of that Ferrari car. He tried to get some insight from McLaren and from Mercedes as to how they feel their tests went. He didn't get very far with those discussions, but sandbagging was no doubt rampant around Bahrain. But Charles Leclerc puts a different team into the conversation as being ahead of Ferrari right now. The PR war continues as all of the teams tried to play down their performance. Who's really going to be out on top in Australia? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Lots to get into. We're going to start here with all the drama in the Middle East at the moment. They have officially postponed the World Endurance Championship round in Qatar. So what's crucial here is that this round is scheduled for the 26th to the 28th of March. That's a good few weeks away, but given contingency planning and the problems with trying to run an event in that part of the world right now, with so many questions around logistics and what's going to happen next, and, well, as they more eloquently than I described it, the evolving geopolitical situation. So they've delayed this event officially, and they've done so. This is an FIA championship with roughly 3-4 weeks to play. So the first round in Bahrain is not far into April, right? So it is becoming very plausible that the stint in the Middle East this season will either not go ahead entirely or not go ahead as planned. I still wouldn't say that that's more likely than not right now, but F1 are absolutely considering the alternatives because, as I say, they've cancelled this, postponed it anyway, the first race of WEC with several weeks' notice. That would imply that if this evolving geopolitical situation continues to evolve for another week and a half, 2 weeks, they might do the same with Bahrain. They might do the same with Jeddah. Absolutely possible, right? In many ways, they're very fortunate that the season doesn't start in Bahrain. The timing, obviously, there's more important things. But from a Formula 1 perspective, they got the testing done. Now the season's starting in Melbourne. Transport has been disrupted. Kilmilman did a good video talking about that the teams have made it reasonably well, but they had long and difficult travel over the last couple of days. The interesting piece that he also mentioned was that in Bahrain, the teams leave a ton of their equipment there from the test, right? Because they know they're coming back race 4. So you go and do the first 3 rounds in Australia, China, Japan, then back to Bahrain. So they leave a ton of their equipment there for the other races. So they would have, they got to go and get it at some point, right? So the situation continues to evolve, but F1 will be thinking about contingency planning. And, well, the first rounds of the WEC season will now start in Imola as a result of this. But it's not going to replace the dates because they were going to be at Imola anyway. Again, it has raised questions as to whether we would go back to Imola for Formula 1 instead. That is the current rumour, that if Bahrain and Jeddah can't happen for these reasons, if the situation in the Middle East doesn't improve, these will be the 2 tracks to be considered. Now, Portimao is coming onto the track. I think it's 2027, isn't it? They have a very short-term contract, but Portimao will be returning to F1 then. Imola has been around for a long time in F1. You could argue maybe isn't fit for purpose so much with these modern Formula 1 cars. Still a fantastic historical circuit, but it's not quite as good as Monza. If you're going to have only one Italian race, that's fundamentally why it's been dropped. Although people will say, well, why do we have 3 US races then, especially Miami? Money, of course, is the answer to all of those questions. But Imola has been pretty keen to get back onto the calendar. Of course, this is an opportunity for that to happen if the Middle East situation doesn't improve. That's your update on that front. The other update for Australia, this is interesting to me. The 11th Formula 1 team arriving in Cadillac means that, well, the garage space, there's extra garages need to be used, there's more people in the pit lane, and as a result, they are reducing the speed limit in the pit lane in Australia from 80 kph down to only 60. Now, last year, you may remember that at some races, I think maybe Singapore, potentially among a couple of others, they increased the pit lane speed because some were already 60, some were 80, most are 80, some are 60. but they increased it at certain races to 80 with the intention of effectively making the racing more interesting, because by reducing the pit lane speed limit, you increase the total pit stop time, which means it's less likely that teams want to do another pit stop. So when races are marginal 1 or 2 stop or marginal 2 or 3 stop, you will get teams preferring not to pit again. For example, Singapore, with a 60 kph speed limit, you kind of have to run it as a 1 stop because the pit lane is so long. You make it 80 kph, all of a sudden you open the door to potentially a 2 stop becomes more viable. So that was part of the reasoning, and it was a question because effectively FIA were making a decision which sacrificed some level of safety, although I would argue very, very marginal with the way that these pit lanes nowadays are managed. Obviously back in the day things were pretty crazy when there was no speed limit in the pit lane, but they were making some sort of trade-off between safety and between entertainment value. Now they're reverting that decision potentially everywhere. I don't know. Australia's going from 80 to 60. I don't know how many other tracks this may follow suit on. I guess we will see. It probably depends on the characteristics of the specific pit lane, but nonetheless an interesting development. This, I believe, is at Fernando Alonso in an Aston Martin Valkyrie, and well, if he was able to drive this upcoming weekend, he might actually be able to finish the race. The funny thing is that Aston Martin did eventually do a tweet saying, okay, it's race week, welcome to the weekend. They do a graphic, but it's just such a depressing graphic, right? Like, we've got round 1 Australian Grand Prix, we've got Stroll and Alonso sideways here, it's black and white, and they say round 1, the work continues at trackside and at home. So it's all a not particularly optimistic appraisal. They, put something on the website here and they say, welcome to Melbourne, we're guaranteed, etc., etc. It's not all about F1, we've got F2 and other things going on as well. But basically what they say is, however the opening race weekend unfolds, this isn't going to be a season where the opening races set the pattern for the year. So I think that pretty much tells you everything you've got to know. Depending on who you ask, you will get a different response in terms of what they're planning for Melbourne. Are they just planning to drive a few laps and effectively tick the box for the Concord Agreement and then call it a day until they get more spare parts for China and further reliability upgrades? But apparently, look, if Honda do bring some countermeasures and Aston Martin do bring some countermeasures, they will at least try them. That will be the goal of the 3 hours of practice, to at least get some testing in, really, which is what they missed out on in actual testing in large part. However, a double DNF is very possible, maybe one could argue probable. I would definitely argue it feels probable as it stands. The team has ideas of what they could potentially do to fix these issues, but it's not clear whether they will be working in time. Let's talk about Ferrari and the pecking order, though, at the front of the field. Ferrari currently are on a 28 consecutive Grand Prix streak with no victory, which is its 5th worst ever. Of course, this has been exacerbated to some degree by longer seasons. So if you've got a bad season, and it's a very long one because you've got a bad car for that season, then you're going to rack up a lot of winless Grand Prix. Maybe you wouldn't have done back in the day when there were fewer Grand Prix in a season. The record is 53, but I expect Ferrari to at least win something this year. They do seem to be a very competitive team. Mercedes are the favourites, but they're not going to win every race, you would imagine, given all of the challenges of this new era, and also the fact that these chassis will vary in terms of their effectiveness at certain weekends. It's difficult to say what percentage of races Ferrari will be better than Mercedes at, but it's plausible that you look at different track types and you could see big variation at the front of the field in terms of who is strong and who isn't. It also massively is indicative of what happens to the energy recovery, right? Because if you've got a circuit with just strong on energy recovery and that's your strength as a team, then you're going to be better there. And maybe if you're on a circuit which is weaker, then you might gain some advantage back on your rivals. So there are so many factors that are at play when it comes to deciding who's going to be the best team on any given weekends. The old advantages, disadvantages, of course, also still hold true as well. We know that over the last couple of years, McLaren have found something with their suspension and their brake ducts that mean they're able to manage the internal temperature of their tyres better than other teams are seemingly able to. That gave them advantages when the tyre compounds were more extreme. So again, that will be relevant, but will it still be an advantage for them? We don't know. How much is that advantage dismissed by all of the other electrical factors? Just so many factors. What it means is likely we will get big variation and swings, But it's also probable that there will be a best team. There usually is when there is a rules reset. Ferrari have looked good in this regard. I mentioned the rear wing, the inverted rear wing yesterday. The latest discussion is that they are trying to bring a version which is lighter, more advanced, and it actuates very consistently by Canada for sure. Bahrain. Canada, I think, is on the 24th of May, I believe, and Bahrain is the 4th round in April. So they were going to try and fast track it, but worst case scenario, it arrives roughly for round 7, round 8, which would still give 2/3 of the season to exploit what is considered to be a pretty substantial straight line advantage. So this is the thing. Even if Ferrari do have a power deficit to Mercedes, they may just have a superior, maybe not chassis, but they have superior maybe downforce on that little plate they've got at the back of the exhaust, maybe from the rear wing. Lots of intrigue, so many complications. Hamilton says, I've been working on the new Ferrari for 14 months. He gives some interesting statements on this. So Auto Racer, they sat down with, at least they got an interview with both of their drivers ahead of the upcoming season. And both Hamilton and Leclerc had some interesting things to say. He was asked about, how do you think Leclerc's going to do? Is he going to beat you in Melbourne? Are you going to beat him? And he says, look, I'm not really so bothered about that. I'm not here to defy the fans. We both want to win, and it's clear that I'd like to be the one to do it. But look, Charles is a great driver. He's been here for 8 years, but I've been working on the 2026 single-seater for 14 months on the sim and with the engineers. Compared to the previous one that I found already designed, I could change very little. This car has a bit of my DNA, and that excites me. So, look, he says for 14 months, pretty much ever since he's joined the team in some regard, he's been sifting through the documents that he submitted to the team and just giving his ideas on what would make a good car as far as he is concerned. And, well, we'll see how that turns out this season. Yes, Hamilton probably wasn't in the CAD simulators designing the parts and coming up with the inverted rear wing idea, but clearly he knows a thing or two about how to build a Formula One car that can win. Hamilton also talked about a few other pieces, such as the following, when he made this comment about Toto and Zach. So he says, the tests revealed little, everyone is hiding, right? So the question was, how much were the other teams hiding compared to Ferrari? Charles Leclerc on the final day was near enough a second quicker than anybody else was. That's unlikely to be representative of true performance. The feeling therefore is, well, Ferrari showed more of their hand than others. Ferrari won't have showed their entire hands. There were rumours, though, that it was only about a second, maybe a second and a bit off where we'd expect pole time to be in Bahrain. The cars are going to be slower this year, but that 1:31.9 wasn't a million miles off where they were in qualifying last season. So it will be competitive. Obviously, these cars are quicker on the straights because they have DRS everywhere, basically, but they're not always quicker on the straights because sometimes they have no energy to deploy. So it's kind of confusing because when you look at, I'm sure that people will make graphics this year comparing last year's pole time to this year's pole time, and on certain straights, this year's car will look rapid, but on others, it will probably be slower because they're super clipping to recharge batteries. So it's going to be really confusing to actually look at a lap and understand where the driver is on the limit, where the advantages and the disadvantages of various cars and drivers come in. That's going to be an issue for the fans to wrap their head around. Max has been pretty vocal on that. The commentators are going to have to do a good job in trying to get this right. And it's difficult to understand. Hamilton said he needed a PhD to understand this stuff. But he did say, look, everyone's been sandbagging. Obviously, Mercedes were hiding stuff. He thinks it's true for other teams as well. Red Bull came out swinging on the first day of testing on the first week, and after that weren't as much of a conversation. So I think teams expect Red Bull to have something in the locker as well. McLaren, maybe not more so, but just McLaren, we think, brought a more advanced version of their car, as in with fewer upgrades to come for Melbourne than others will. And they were good, but they weren't exactly rapid, precisely. Lewis says, I called Toto Wolff at Mercedes and Zach Brown at McLaren to try to understand what they understood, but I didn't get any results. However, I have one certainty, we can face any situation, we've got what it takes to win. I came to Ferrari because I believed in it, and I still believe in it. So I think it's funny that he's phoned up Toto, being like, oh, Toto, how's your winter been, right? Like, how's the weather faring out there? And I've been having a good time with Kim Kardashian out here in, I don't know where he's been, Arizona or something. And he's asking Toto, like, yeah, how did you guys find, that C3 tyre? Certainly when the engines were turned up, we thought it was, X, Y, Z. And Toto's like, Lewis, like, I know the games you're trying trying to play here. I feel like maybe there was a world where he could have got Toto to tell him something, but Zach Brown, like, good luck with that, right? I mean, good luck with Toto as well. Like, these guys aren't stupid. They know Lewis's game. Also, I kind of respect Lewis trying, you know what I mean? Like, he's clearly committed because he's taken the 0.1% chance that he was going to get any actionable insight from his two key rivals this season, arguably. But the other key rival, of course, is Max Verstappen at Red Bull. So that is the key question, really, where Red Bull are in this conversation, and certainly where Max is going to be. I'm not expecting Isaac Hadjar to be winning races, but Max could and is not one to count out, especially if the top teams are close as we think that they could be. Now, the general consensus is Mercedes and Ferrari are the teams to beat, but Charles Leclerc throws a different name into the conversation. As we just saw, Hamilton was talking to Toto and to Zach, so Mercedes McLaren trying to get their insights kind of implies they're the contenders, right? But Charles Leclerc says differently, and he says it would be a year to have a Ferrari, it'd be a dream to have a Ferrari year, but it's too early to make predictions, especially since we don't know the potential of our rivals, we don't know who's really in the lead. They seem well prepared, their rivals. I have the impression that the four teams that have recently been battling for the championship are quite close. Mercedes could have a slight advantage, but Red Bull also seems a little ahead. So this I thought was kind of interesting. And again, Leclerc will be playing a PR game. George Russell, I think, is going to be on a generational run this season when it comes to talking to the media. You know, I can picture George winning a race by 35 seconds and being like, yeah, good package this weekend, but I'm not sure how that's going to translate going forwards and, you know, I don't know, downplaying some advantages they might have. I'm not sure that's going to happen or Mercedes are going to be that good, but you just know how it's going to play out. The teams, certainly if Mercedes are the gold standard, they will not want to show more than they have to. This is the thing. If they really do have an engine advantage, if any of these teams have a substantial advantage, there's no point winning by 35 seconds. In fact, George would probably not do so. He would likely back off to only win by 15, right? Okay, it's probably against the natural instincts of a driver to do that. But we've seen this in the past, especially when regulations change, even with Mercedes back in 2014, when they were trying, via engine tricks and other things, to try and not appear as strong as they were. I don't think the advantage is going to be like that, whether for Mercedes or somebody else. But we know that the teams are going to play the politics because it's just so important in terms of the other teams getting developmental advantages, getting extra testing time, extra money to spend. You want to be ahead, but you want to be just enough ahead to secure the 25 points. You don't need to win by a minute. So, you know, it only means that the regulators are going to try and clamp you down. So that's where all the teams have to play around. But I thought it was interesting that Leclerc mentioned Red Bull because we've not really heard that from anyone, to be honest. We've heard, okay, Max, like he might be built different. He might find a way using first gear to recover more energy and be more effective, whatever. Red Bull's engine on day one, we thought, oh my God, it's godlike. Mercedes said that they were gaining a second a lap on their engine. It's like, yeah, sure, buddy. We'll see how that goes. And Max said, yeah, Toto's just waffling. I know their real performance. We'll see how it translates to the track when we get to Australia. But for Leclerc to say Red Bull, because most have said it's Mercedes, Ferrari, and if there is a third place team, it's probably McLaren. That's been the general consensus. I do think it's very close to call, and as we mentioned earlier, there are so many variables, it becomes almost impossible to diagnose specifically where performance is going to be gained weekend to weekends. That picture will only become clear as the season goes on. But Leclerc says Red Bull are a team to watch, even putting them ahead of Ferrari themselves. Although nobody else is doing that, right? It's only Ferrari and Leclerc who are saying that they are behind Red Bull right now. So I don't really think that they are. But again, Australia is a very different track to the two tracks we've done testing at, Barcelona and Bahrain. So who knows, really? And if there is an advantage that Red Bull do have an energy recovery, which was the theory, then it will be very important in Australia because there's no opportunities to recover energy. It's a very difficult circuit when it comes to battery management. So that's how we understand it. Mercedes, he thinks, could be slightly ahead. He didn't say, oh yeah, Mercedes are the clear favourite. So Leclerc is optimistic, for sure. He's definitely optimistic. Both Hamilton and Leclerc have belief. It's not been a disastrous pre-season like last year was. It's been a much more positive one, and I think both Leclerc and Hamilton will genuinely feel that they could be in the hunt for the World Championship this year, in the constructors and in the drivers. They've certainly started the season in a fashion that would imply race wins, potentially championship contention could be on the table. Again, how much do Mercedes have in the locker? How close are the other teams? These are important questions. Helmut Marko, we've not talked about him in some time, but he's back. He's talking about his clear message, and he says that Mercedes are the favourites, then Ferrari, then McLaren, then Red Bull. So again, he's probably going to downplay his boys at Red Bull, but he says Mercedes were with more fuel and didn't push its engine to capacity. I think Mercedes will be at the front, then Ferrari, then McLaren, then Red Bull. But I think everyone believes it's at least going to be reasonably close. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. This is the forecast for Melbourne. Pretty interesting, the difference here between quali and race day. It is set to be substantially hotter on race day and even hotter than all of the practice sessions. It's not meant to rain. It's not going to be outrageous. We know that I think they're making the race earlier, aren't they? Because one time the sun got in Carlos Sainz's eyes and he said that he crashed because of it a couple of years ago. So maybe that's the reason why the race is so early nowadays in the UK. Whatever. The point being that quali and race are going to be quite different conditions. Getting these tyres to work, they're brand new tyres for the year. The cars are so different, so the teams, all of the knowledge that the teams have built over the last few years, how to get their tyres into the right window, will kind of go out the window this season. There's way more to learn, and if qualifying is at 18 degrees, obviously track temperature will be higher, but you get the point, and the race is 7 degrees hotter, add a few extra degrees onto that for the, the track temperature differentials. That's going to be something that teams are going to have to watch out for. So, yeah, I think we're expecting chaos, and for understandable reasons. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for all the support lately. Can't wait for this weekend. It's going to be spectacular for good and for bad, I think. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.